Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Stacy Tucker. I'm Vice President and CFO of the Flinn Foundation. I'm very happy to be here today to introduce the next session of the Arizona Center for Civic Leadership's CivEx series. And today's topic is the impact of tax policy on Arizona businesses. This is actually very near and dear to my heart as I began my professional career in the tax department of one of the large accounting firms. And I actually have a master's in business and tax, which is a bit nerdy, but true. So today we'll be learning about some of Arizona's tax policy and structure, followed by a panelist discussion on some of these ideas. So before we get really going, Sarah Larson, who works with me here at the foundation, has a few polling questions.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So we kind of want to see who's in the audience today. So we have a few questions and we'd like to see who's here. So our first question is, what area of the state are you joining from? All right, so it looks like most people are joining from an urban center in the state, but we do have a number of participants from rural Arizona. So our next polling question is, which sector do you represent? Looks like we have a large number of individuals from the nonprofit community, as well as public and education industries. And then our final polling question is in regards to the topic of the day, which is taxation in Arizona and how it's utilized for businesses. So which Arizona tax are you hoping to learn more about during today's webinar? Right, it looks like most people are interested in learning about personal or corporate income tax, as well as some individuals who are interested in knowing about the TPT, the transaction privilege tax, and property taxes. So thank you very much for interacting with our poll today.
All right, thank you, Sarah. That's good information for our group. A moment on housekeeping. If you have any questions throughout the session, please go ahead and post those to the Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen, and those will be monitored with those questions going forth to our panelists. And with that, I'd like to introduce Chris Camacho. He is the president and CEO of the Greater Phoenix Economic, I'm like watching this here. Center. Sorry about that. We want to thank him for his partnership with their group. GPEC's mission is to attract and grow quality businesses and advocate for Greater Phoenix's competitiveness. During Chris's tenure, GPEC has helped attract more than 414 companies, creating more than 74,000 jobs and $11 billion in capital investment. And that's probably even a larger number since that was posted to the website. So with that, Chris, welcome, and let's have you on, please.
All right, Stacy, I am here. I think you can hear me, but oh, there we go. So start my video. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you very much, Stacy. I think we're all recovering tax people here, at least the first two out of the gate. And you're going to hear from Kristen Stephenson, our Senior Vice President, here in a moment. I want to thank the Flinn Foundation for the partnership that we've had for a number of years, and particularly this program today. As you described, Greater Phoenix Economic Council is a public-private partnership. We host and work with 22 of our representative cities. One of our favorite mayors, Mayor Kristen Price, is going to be on the panel today as well, talking taxes and probably many other things, knowing that, Mayor. But yeah, we represent about 170 private sector companies as well that are all organized to help advance the economic development opportunities for all of our citizens here, almost 4.9 million people here in the Metro Phoenix market. We go outside Metro Phoenix to recruit companies from around the world. So companies like Apple and Microsoft and TSMC and many others from, again, around the world to Greater Phoenix. And we've had a great run of new high wage jobs being created, so some of the best in the country. And at the same time, we go out and brand and market the region to ensure that these companies understand the facets of what it's like to expand a business here, raise a family here, access the opportunity that exists here. And then coupled with that, we work on advancing the regional competitive position of the market, working with Arizona legislators, working with Governor Ducey, working with our 22 mayors of our cities and towns, along with the Board of Supervisors here in metropolitan Phoenix. So with that, you're going to hear a very important topic today, which is taxes. I noticed you did not have an other category for your third question because I wasn't certain how many people love learning about taxes, but I will tell you, Kristen and I, as two recovering tax folks, love to dig into taxes, competitiveness of taxes, which taxes matter more than others, how to create a balanced tax system, ideas around tax code modernization. And in an advanced industry world, obviously, we're trying to make sure Arizona's tax code is as competitive as possible so we continue to drive high wage jobs and make it attractive for people and businesses to live and have success here. So with that, I'm going to introduce Kristen Stephenson, our Senior Vice President of Research and Analytics, and she will give you a brief presentation on taxes. So thank you very much again for the partnership with Flinn Foundation today. On to you, Kristen.
Thanks, Chris. As Chris said, we love digging into taxes. This is actually one of my favorite topics to talk about, as nerdy as that sounds. So I'm very excited to have the opportunity to share with you guys today. And I know everybody's looking forward to our panel discussion, but I'll go ahead and set the background here with our current tax structure so that you all have a little bit of background information before we get into the panel discussion. So we're going to cover the main components of taxes here in Arizona today. We're going to discuss property tax, sales tax, and income tax, and a brief discussion about how this actually compares to our competitor states. So starting off with the one that's probably the most complicated is our property tax system here. This is an ad valorem tax on the value of real and personal property. Our effective tax rate for businesses is just over 2%. When we compare to other states, when we're looking at property taxes, we look at the effective rate, as every state has different rates and different assessment ratios. So this allows us to do this apples to apples comparison of what the structures look like in Arizona and other states. The effective rate that we're talking about here is calculated by looking at the assessment ratio multiplied by the rate. Now, Arizona does have one of the higher property tax rates among our competitor states, but we do have ways of reducing this impact, which I'll get into over the next couple slides here. So we have two types of property here in Arizona that we're looking at: real property and personal property. Basically, if it's attached to the land and buildings, it's considered real property. If it's something that could be moved from site to site, it's personal property. And so we have a system where, as I mentioned before, we're looking at assessment ratios and rates. So our assessment ratios are determined based on what type of property it is. When we're looking at business taxes, we tend to focus on the commercial and industrial class 1 property, which is 18%, agricultural and vacant land, which is 15%, and our special taxing category, which includes things like the foreign trade zone or the military use zone, and it's 5% assessment ratio. This is applied to both primary and secondary values of property, and they determine how much of your property is subject to taxes. There are additional classes for, residential and things like that as well, but since we're focused on businesses here, I won't get into that. So I know this looks like quite a few numbers, but let's walk through it just a little bit. The amount in property paid in property taxes is calculated by taking the value of the property multiplied by the assessment ratio and then by the tax rate. So you'll see a tax rate set for every jurisdiction within a property. So you're looking at county rates, city rates, school district rates, and special districts. So really, when we are analyzing, property taxes for a business case comparison, we're looking at that specific parcel so that we can get that information and then multiplying it out to do the calculations. But for here, I've included the average tax rate in the state for our calculation purposes here. And so what we do is, as I said, assessment ratio times rate gives you how much of your taxes that you'll pay for personal property. And this is where I was saying that we'll get into kind of how to reduce the burden, is you are only subject to, the value of the property. So you have the ability to depreciate the property before you go into the same calculation. And we also have a very generous standard exemption that's taken off of the value of the property. And then getting into more specifics, we actually do have a very aggressive additional depreciation schedule here in Arizona. So that means that you can further reduce it's not reducing the rate, but what you're doing is reducing the value that's subject to property taxes. So you can see in a situation like this, a property that's $1 million, you're going to save tens of thousands of dollars by the time you factor in additional depreciation, which does keep us competitive, even with the rates I showed you on that first slide. So let's get into transaction privilege tax. So you may be asking, what's a transaction privilege tax? That's what we have in lieu of sales tax here in Arizona. So it's a tax on the privilege of doing business here in Arizona. The average rate in Arizona is about 8.4%. That does include the state rate of 5.6%, as well as a county rate and a city rate. As in terms of sales taxes, we do have kind of a higher rate nationwide, but that's actually pretty common among states in the Mountain West area. And so you can see when we're looking at our competitor states, we're actually kind of middle of the pack here. The other thing to consider too is that we do have exemptions that you're allowed to use for certain things. So for example, if you have machinery and equipment for manufacturing, that's not subject to sales tax at all. So it's something that we pitch to businesses that are looking to come here of, you're not even subject to sales tax or transaction privilege taxes on certain categories of goods. And then finally, the last major component of our tax system here is our income tax, which breaks into two different components, the corporate income tax and the individual income tax. So our state rate in Arizona for corporate income tax is 4.9%. Again, a very competitive rate amongst our competitor states, much lower than places like California, for example. The other thing to consider here too is how we determine how much of their income is subject to tax. So we look at what's known as sales factor. So we offer a single sales factor or a double weighted sales factor. Basically, it apportions how much of their income is subject to Arizona taxes. If it's single sales factor, then basically their portion of sales in Arizona compared to their global sales determines how much of their income is subject to tax. If they opt for the double weighted, it looks at sales, property, and payroll. Again, Arizona share versus global share. That way they're not paying taxes on all income, just what they've earned in Arizona. And the nice thing about our structure here is that we allow companies to choose whether they're going to do single factor or double weighted factor, which allows them to look at whichever situation is the most favorable for them. The other thing that I want to address here is you see Texas and Washington both have zero. So we get that as a question a lot. Well, Texas doesn't have an income tax. Washington doesn't have an income tax. Well, the thing that I think a lot of people don't consider is that they do have other taxes in lieu of this. So for example, Texas has a gross receipts tax and Washington levies what's known as a business and occupation tax. So when we're looking at our competitive environment here in Arizona, compared to other states, we're looking at that whole big picture. And then personal income tax. For this, it's important to understand rates and brackets here. And I know there's a lot going on about income tax that we're all hearing about. So what I'm showing you right now is how it currently stands right now. So for example, Colorado and Utah, both states have rates that are in the mid to high fours, but they're a flat tax. So everybody pays the same tax rate, no matter what your income tax is. Here in Arizona, we have different brackets. So our lowest bracket ranges from 2.59 up to 4.5. And then we do have that 3.5% surcharge from the Proposition 208 on incomes over 250,000 or 500,000 for married couples. And to give you a little bit of an example of how this matters, why taxes matter, is taxes are just one component that a business is looking at when they're looking to evaluate our state. So I've shown what we have is kind of a sample operating cost comparison. When a business is coming here, they're looking at things like property tax, but they're also looking at payroll, benefits, utilities, real estate, and things of that nature. So for example, the two examples I'm going to show you are the same, except for their personal property investments. So you can see how that changes the equation. In here, we're looking at a 5 million personal property investment. In that case, Greater Phoenix would be 9.5 million in annual operating cost in this scenario, ranking just ahead or just behind Salt Lake and Dallas, but ahead of areas like Denver, Los Angeles, and Seattle. If we have a situation where we have additional personal property, as I mentioned, we have some of those aggressive depreciation schedules, the overall operating cost gets a little more expensive, but we become a more effective market because places like Dallas have such high property taxes. So just to give you a few examples here on how taxes fit into the overall big picture. And with that, if anybody has any specific questions from my presentation, I can take those now. Otherwise, I will introduce Cameron. So let's see. And I see a couple different questions. So let's go with, there is a question about how the proposed tax compares to the current values. So this would still put us in the middle of the pack, kind of compared to some of the other states, but I'd have to look at all the specifics to get those answers. So at this point, I think I'm going to turn it over to Cameron, Robb, and our panelists.
Thank you, Kristen.
Yes,
that was excellent.
Cameron is our Vice President of Business Development here at GPEC and has the pleasure of working with the businesses that are interested in our economy. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Cameron and our panelists.
Thank you so much for that. And, I'd love to talk about the weather. It's such a great day to talk about taxes. This is going to be an exciting discussion. I'm really pleased to introduce to you our three panelists that are going to be joining us today. And I'm going to start with Mayor Christian Price. He's been a resident of the city of Maricopa since early 2005 after moving from Chandler with his wife. And I can attest to the fact that Mayor Price is an enormous advocate of networking. So, having had the pleasure, pre-pandemic when we could gather more frequently, I never saw the mayor miss an opportunity to build relationships with, various stakeholders and regional partners and, members of neighboring cities and other government officials. So thank you for that. And thank you for your partnership with GPEC Mayor. He's also had the privilege of working as a legislative analyst for Arizona State House of Representatives, and of course has that firsthand knowledge of legislative processes and procedures. So that said, we will likely hand it to you today when it comes time to do some tough talk. But a fun fact, his family hails from Northwest Tucson. He's an Eagle Scout and fluent in Spanish. Nice to know. I'd also like to bring up Fletcher Montzingo, who, to be honest, may be in a little bit today and out a little bit today because it's definitely busy in his seat right now. He is currently the Director of Fiscal Policy for Majority Staff, where he provides recommendations for both the state budget and tax policy as everything pertains to insurance and state pensions. So, it's a great day to talk taxes, like I said. Prior to joining the Senate, Fletcher spent 4 years at the governor's budget office, providing analytical research and recommendations to the executive branch on state agency funding. So hoping that he'll be able to come in and out with us today. And then Trevor Abarzua, he is our partner over at the Arizona Commerce Authority, the Vice President of Business Attraction, and he's focused mainly on attracting electric vehicle industry and its supply chain. So, you know, again, you're in the right lane, Trevor. We've got a lot going on in that area. Certainly, we've brought some deals home in that area. He started his career working for Senator John McCain's Senate reelection in 2016, and then he was hired onto Governor Doug Ducey's staff. So first as a policy assistant focusing on economic development, and then promoted to Director of Operations and Logistics. So dream team here for a panel discussion. Thank you for joining us. Just a quick reminder, and thanks for everybody who's been active in the chat, but if you do have a question, please throw that in the Q&A. So we just heard from Kristen about the current state of taxes. And, you know, of course, today is a special day for new policy updates. I'm not sure, Fletcher, if you're able to walk us through kind of the current landscape and what you see for future legislation and its potential impact. I'll let you share what makes sense, but we would love to hear from you.
Sure. Thanks, Cameron. On the table, if you will, at the legislature is a tax proposal that's valued at approximately $2 billion. It primarily hits income tax, but it also affects property tax as well. No sales tax component to it, so I'll just strike that one out. The income tax portion, the primary part of it is decreasing the bottom 4 rates. So we really have a 5-rate system now after Prop 208. Before 208, we had a 4-rate system. Changes those rates to 1 rate of 2.5%. So that's going from 2.5945 down to 2.5%. And then it creates a new top marginal rate of 4.5%, where it's currently at 8%. And this is 8% when you combine the Prop 208 surcharge plus the existing 4.5%. So that's the main components of it. The other components are there's a new expansion of the dependent credit by about $50. That's a smaller part. And then there's some other more targeted tax reductions in it. The property tax part that's on the table is reducing the assessment ratio. So as you saw in the slides, the current assessment ratio for commercial properties at 18%. This would go down to 17% over 2 tax years, which are synonymous with calendar years, starting next calendar year / tax year. So 22 and 23, it would go down to 17%. Just to give some rationale, which I'll give on why these are being proposed. There are some down here, particularly for the folks I work for, who just like tax cuts. So that's just a political rationale. Got to throw it out there. There are others who are concerned about the potential negative impacts of the large increase in the top marginal rate. So the idea of lowering the top marginal rate is essentially creating, well, it's lowering the top marginal rate, so income will still be taxed at 4.5% where it was taxed before. But the idea or the proposal would hold the liability for Prop 208 harmless. So when the taxpayer pays the 4.5%, the state then credits 1 percentage point of that to the state general fund for general operations, and then 3.5 percentage points to Prop 208. So that's, I want to be clear on that point because we've had to articulate that a few times because we do have to satisfy that liability because it's a voter protective measure. So that's kind of the main thrust of the income tax rationale, is trying to negate what at least the folks I work down here think is going to be negative economic impacts of that. And then the property tax part is a much longer standing issue that various organizations have raised, where just to put it in simplistic term, the residential assessment ratio is 10%, commercial is 18%. They think there's an over subsidization. Oh, can't say that word. Of property tax in the commercial side versus the residential side. So it used to be at 25%, 20 so years ago, and it's progressively gotten reduced. At the same time, to hold the class 3 or homeowners harmless, what the proposal does is increase what's called the homeowners rebate, which is a rebate on primary school property or your primary property taxes for schools of up to $600. So Currently, that's at about 47.2% and would increase to 50% under the proposal starting next tax year. And the idea is, again, is to hold the class 3 taxpayers, homeowners, harmless from the tax shifts that would otherwise occur, because property tax is essentially a closed loop system. If you take away or add from here or there, you have to add to someone else. So those are the proposals on the table. Some of the effects of that, which we are working through, not only impact state revenues, but I'm sure, as Mayor Price knows, impacts future city revenues. The state shares 15% of the income tax it collects from 2 years prior. So fiscal 22 revenues, which we're going into next year, are based on fiscal 20 revenues. So if we cut income tax revenues by a significant margin at all, that would reduce what cities would otherwise receive in terms of income tax revenues. So that is an ongoing discussion that we are still having with the city's representatives down here. And I really don't have anything to say more on that for the time being. It's just an ongoing discussion that we're working through as we consider this tax package. And the one other thing I'll add is just the other rationale is taxes aren't everything when it comes to attracting businesses or economic growth. It's one input to the equation, but it's an input that lawmakers directly control. They don't control some of the other inputs. And so that's why it's looked at as one of the key mechanisms to try to reduce the cost of business, because it's something they can deliberately affect versus other issues out there that they can't as deliberately or as quickly affect, but that of course play a big role into economic development, economic growth, and economic attraction. Just one thing that comes to mind is very relevant: housing. That I'm sure that plays into how people are looking at this state and wondering whether their employees can own homes or not. So I'll just add that is the tool that we have here. There are other tools, of course, but it's the primary tool. And I think that's kind of the overview I have on what's on the table down here.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you, Fletcher. And I appreciate that you would add that there's more than just taxes that kind of rolls into an overall, economic decision to be made by our businesses. But we do have a question for you, and I'm going to ask it now in case, we can't keep you. But
Sure.
Amy Love wanted to know, if the state were to strike down Prop 208, what would be the liability then for those income earners expected to be subject to its provisions?
What would be, so I can give you sort of an aggregate number. So Prop 208 was projected to raise between $800 and $900 million. So if that were struck down at the courts, then that liability would go away. And essentially the top marginal rate policy would be meaningless too at that point, because if you reduced if you reduce all the existing rates to 2.5%, then no one will hit that top marginal cap. It's just not how it works out. So that's effectively what the aggregate liability would decline by. How many taxpayers are we talking about? There's various estimates put out there. I think I'll give you ballparks: 40 to 100,000 taxpayers. Those are kind of the ranges of the various studies from the proponents and the opponents of Prop 208. So, there's one truth over here, one truth over here, and there's probably somewhere in the middle that the truth is when it comes to how many taxpayers will be affected, because it's not a static number. That number can change in any given year. People can fall in or fall out having incomes at that level. But that's kind of the estimates we've been working with.
Fair enough. Thanks for breaking it down. So I think, Fletcher, we'll go on pause for a second, because I do want to ask Trevor now, from the state perspective, if you could share some insight on, how does it have an impact? How does tax policy, how do taxes have an impact on our competitiveness, especially, when we're in the deal-making process?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Cameron. I appreciate it. And again, Trevor Abarzua with the Arizona Commerce Authority, and we're the state agency that is housed under the governor's office in state government that deals with economic development. And not only, tax policy or tax credits and incentives, but we also assist, companies throughout the whole process of starting up or moving here or even expanding here. So we do have a number of programs, whether it's, the tax credits and incentives, but also workforce programs, training programs, and even small business, helping them figure out the bureaucracy level of getting through permitting and things like that. So we are a one-stop shop for companies that are looking to come here. And again, we partner with GPEC and Sun Corridor and Econa up in Flagstaff and all the other partners around the state. So we are a state agency and service the rural and urban parts of the state. I would say, in my role, as well as the vice president of business attraction, I'm more in the deal process. I know we have the tax experts and research and policy experts, and I'm the one more, talking with the CEOs, talking with the C-suites and the companies face to face on whether they want to move to Arizona or one of our competing states, whether it be, Nevada, Texas, whoever. So I think, we see it on a daily basis where companies come in, and that's a big thing, the cost of doing business. And a lot of the times we see companies, the bulk of them are going to be coming from California or Illinois or New York, where it's burdensome, tax or even regulations in their state, and they want to be freed from that. So again, Arizona being one of the more competitive states from a tax perspective, they always look here. And I think, some of the things that we see, and, definitely, and I know that we touched on it earlier in the presentation, but, the flashy ones like, income tax, or, Texas has a 0%, but I see Arizona has a percentage here. But when we tell the whole story and the whole picture, again, we're very competitive. I think from a state standpoint, and how we structure our incentives, I think it's really important to note that, we have, competitive incentives, but they're all performance based. So when we administer these incentives, whether it's our quality jobs tax credit program that incentivizes job growth in all industries, or qualified facility tax credit that incentivizes manufacturing jobs, it's based on how many jobs they create and the amount of investments they have. And they don't receive those credits until they actually, hire those people. So everything is performance based. And I think the other thing to know, comparing, say, attracting jobs to, say, Maricopa County or Tucson compared to, say, some of our rural parts, is that they are structured based on an average salary, an average wage, and those are based on counties. So, the average wage, say, in Maricopa County is going to be different than the average wage, in Gila County or in, Coconino. So, and we see that, helping companies go to rural counties. I think one of the biggest examples, and I want to shout out Gail Jackson, who I saw is on the call, and she's from Econa up in Flagstaff, but we did just land a really important and a really crucial electric vehicle parts manufacturer, UACJ Whitehall, and, the ACA partnered with Econa and bringing them here. But, they looked at the whole state. They looked at, the Tucson area, Casa Grande. They looked at, they looked at Maricopa, and they looked at, they looked everywhere. And they were traveling around the state, and they had a day, and they wanted to go check out, the White Mountains up in Flagstaff, and they fell in love. And they loved Flagstaff, and it so happened, Coconino County, even though we consider Flagstaff a city, and it very much is, the Coconino as a county is considered rural from a tax standpoint, from our incentive standpoint. So it actually helped them qualify for more incentives, and was easier to qualify based on those wage scales. So again, the way that we structure our tax credits in the state, I think it's competitive, but also too, it's fair, so that we're not just incentivizing those big cities to grow jobs. But I think all in all, Arizona economies, and I know everyone on the call could attest it, it's on fire right now. And we've been seeing, massive amounts of manufacturing companies, whether it's, the chip industry and TSMC and Intel announcements, or, the Lucid and Nickel announcements a couple years ago, and others. But, we're seeing a boom right now. And I think us staying competitive from a tax standpoint, and from a regulation standpoint, I know this is a tax call, but I think that's a huge, crucial part of companies being interested in Arizona, is that light regulation state. And also from a workforce standpoint, us having a strong education system, strong, secondary and university system, and producing that talent that these companies need. I think it's all a recipe for them coming here. So, but it's a strong place. I think Arizona's in a strong place. And again, comparing to our states like California, Illinois, New York, we're doing well. So that's that. And I'm happy to answer your questions later on, and look forward to speaking. So.
Thank you, Trevor. And I second that. Appreciate that great insight. And I think you're right. We have the structure that it takes to be competitive and fair, which I appreciate. And so now I would love to, pass it over to Mayor Price, and wondering if you could speak to how the cities work within the Arizona tax structure, and maybe not just with the 2021 changes, but overall. And then very interested to hear what opportunities you see in front of us.
Thank you very much, Cameron. Appreciate it. Certainly with Trevor and Fletcher on the call, those are the tax experts, and Stacy and everybody. I'm here to kind of give you the where the rubber meets the road perspective. I've had the pleasure of sitting on as a board member of the ACA here for the last few years. I worked as a legislative analyst. And now, you know, I think that I have the opportunity of doing something that a lot of people don't understand. And that is that, you know, we always look to the state, and I think that's great. But the fact of the matter is that the economics of where these deals really begin I'm not talking the huge ones. The biggest ones always go to the state first, but there's a lot that are not in the $1 billion range that look at the cities and towns first, and that's where they go to, and they go to their economic development departments. And so, you know, my job is to look at this and say, how is it that we take all of these rules and regulations, all of the codes that we have as cities and towns, what does the state allow us to do and not to do, what does the state constitution do, and what do the tax policies say, so that we can operate within that yet still be unique and individual. And that's just a really important fact. I know that there's this philosophy that we should all be, you know, the same, but it's just not the case. I mean, Trevor just got finished saying it. They fell in love with Flagstaff. Why? I went to school in Flagstaff. I love Flagstaff. I think it's great. I'd love to live up in Flagstaff. But the fact of the matter is that we're all unique in our own way. And so, you know, to Fletcher's original point, that I think that's what I really want to hammer home and give an experience is that, you know, taxes are critical, they're important, and it all comes down to money. I think I told you this, I'm a financial advisor. I understand trends and cycles and, you know, money, that's my forte, that's what I get. But at the same time, I understand that it's not everything. People will pay more for something they love. People will do something more because they get something else out of it that doesn't translate into only money. And so, you know, a few years back, we had a great campaign through the ambassadors program at GPEC that I sit on, and with Chris Camacho and others, and we went and we met with the leadership of both the House and the Senate, and we basically formulated an education campaign, and we brought in site selectors, and we sat down with them and we talked to them. And as we met with these site selectors, here's the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate and some of the key legislative staff on both sides of the aisle, and we basically got to sit there and talk and explain how at the end of the day, we all think the money's important, but there's so much more that goes into it. Transportation, for example, light rail, you know, subway systems, you know, the geography, the workforce, the list goes on and on and on. And so, you know, prices of land and you know, how do you get through the city systems and the red tape that exists, you know, there at the state level. So there's just so much more than just taxes. And so I think it's a misnomer for us as people and to expect it of our elected representatives at the state level. You know, we shouldn't just be looking for the talking points. We should be looking for the holistic picture, because that's what people want. People want it. The education component is critical. And, you know, this is a special year. As an investment advisor, you know, I fully believe it takes money to make money. And I believe that you invest in yourself. And when you have that money available to you, it's not about spending it. It's about investing it. It's about putting it to work for you that will have dividends and payoffs and ultimately an ROI that expands hundreds of years into the future, if not in the next 50 or 60. So, you know, I think that, you know, we've really got to do a better job of talking holistically. And as a city and town, you know, I can tell you that we have done everything to get government red tape out of the way. We have VIP services. You know, we continue to reduce our own tax liabilities on a regular basis. But at the same time, we are a fast growing city. We needed everything yesterday. And so you have to be able to put all these things in place so that you are attractive in the holistic perspective. And that's what these companies are looking for. You know, when we lose deals to, and, you know, Trevor and Fletcher can attest to this, especially GPEC, when we lose deals to other locations, it's not always because of taxes or money. I mean, we think it is, that's the first indication, but the reality is sometimes it's about the extra incentives. Sometimes it's about the transportation they have. I don't know how many deals I've heard GPEC tell me that we lost because they had a light rail system that was more robust than ours, you know, or they had a better transportation system that they could move their goods and services more robust than ours. That's what we need to be focusing on if we're truly going to push this state long term.
Can't argue with any of that. And, you know, it's really interesting because I think, you know, not only are you right about the fact that it's never just one thing, and sometimes it could just be that likability factor, the livability factor. We have the quality of life. We have the talented and skilled workforce. You could take a look at the 20 tech companies, for example, that we've, you know, located here, many from the Bay Area. and they're going to comment on the fact that we have the tech talent that they didn't expect we would have. So a lot of it comes down to talent and quality of life. And actually GPEC rolled out an Arizona or an AZ Free to Be campaign, which kind of highlights a lot of that. So we can probably throw a link for you in this chat. Just a reminder to post your questions in the Q&A. But as we're kind of, going down the path a little bit, Fletcher, Trevor, Mayor, I would like for you to all think about the fact that growth economies require continued investment. Right. So, basically what you're saying is it comes to transportation and infrastructure and, communications, like we have to take a look at how we can also structure our taxes and incentives to build on that long-term competitiveness. So I would love it if somebody could, kind of take a crack at how we could be more competitive from a tax policy standpoint in the short term, like immediately, what do you think is on deck for us? Not to get controversial, but I do feel like, if we're going to talk about an innovation economy, and being a true growth market, what's next?
Sure. Yeah, I can take the first stab at that. And it's something that's not, I don't think, in the budget this year. So, maybe just an idea or a long-term plan. But I think, like you said, Cameron, structuring some of our incentives for the modern day economy, right? And I say modern day as because I feel the economy has changed in the last, 12 months since COVID. And some of our programs, which, they're great and they're very competitive across the country, but there are just some statutory things that, could, hold something up, especially now post-COVID. So for example, our quality jobs tax credit, which is a job creation tax credit. Essentially, if you create more than 25 jobs, you'll receive an income or a non-refundable tax credit for those jobs. So I know the way they're structured right now is based on income, right? And I know now with Silicon Valley and with, the startup land, doing so well and Arizona being recognized as a tech hub now, I think the way that it's structured is it's for those income, companies based on income. And some of these startups don't have income for the first year, 2 years, 5 years, and they're well-known companies, they're building up and they're getting, investing but they don't have that income or they don't have that product they're selling yet. So those companies that are creating jobs and they're creating, that R&D investment, they're not able to utilize that credit. So that could be something that we could take a look at and innovate the credit because it already exists, but just changing a couple, words in statute could really help some of these startups. And based on that credit as well, because, the quality jobs tax credit, like Cameron, is one of the ones that we use most on a lot of these office users and tech startups and, the fintech world. And, with COVID now happening, a lot of these workers are working from home and companies are still moving to Arizona and they're still hiring Arizonans or bringing people and people are moving to Arizona based on that, but they're working from their homes. And the way the credit is structured now is, they have to create the jobs at one business location. And, when we get caught up in the statute, that's okay. Well, if they don't have a physical office now, I've worked with a couple companies now that are interested in coming here, but, they want to build their office out, say in 2023 or 2024, when they think, life's going to be back to normal and everyone being back in offices, but they can't utilize that credit until they have that specific office up and running and the people are working there. So again, a quick change that could really put us ahead of other states in terms of incentive and innovating an incentive, but really innovating for that 21st century post-COVID world. So those are two ideas I had, and again, they're not on the docket in the budget. So I wanted to bring those up before Fletcher could talk about some of the things that are on the docket. So
great, thanks, Fletcher. Go ahead.
Yeah, can I actually not answer the short term, but more answer the long term part? Just because the short term, I think is. It's difficult for me to take a step back. I think I'm obligated to say we have a great plan out there, but no, I think for the long term, because this is something I forget where it sparked, but I think our tax structure, most states' tax structures are they're based in a 20th century economy in a 20th century world that relied on a lots of like for example, relied on gas to fund roads. And so if we're going to think about the long term and how our tax structure, what we need to tax, not how much we need to, but what we need to tax and to fund things that promote growth, I think that's a more longer term discussion that doesn't tend to happen. We tend to be more reactive down in government. And so that sort of longer term view of how do we position ourselves for a tax structure that can be utilized in a more modern economy, so it can be used to fund services and things that people need. I mean, like, you know, there's been talk for years about raising the gas tax, and that would still yield more money. But when Ford starts coming out with fleet vehicles that are going to be, you know, electric trucks, and when people start gravitating towards that, well, what's a gas tax going to do for you? You're not going to derive much revenue from it. And so that's, I think, the more longer term perspective that needs to be fleshed out more. And I don't have any answers for it. I just think it needs to be thought through better. And then ultimately, I'm at some point there might be legislation that contemplates such changes, like, I don't know, charging electric vehicles a certain amount per kilowatt, or I honestly don't have a car, so electric car, so I don't know how much they take in energy, but it's that sort of discussions that would fund at least future growth in this state.
Thanks. And, you know, there's a question here in the chat from Coral Evans. And so I want to make sure I'm getting it right, but, you know, could or should the investment that is required to ensure viability in business include a more direct investment basically for the public education system in Arizona? Coral, please help correct if that's not what you meant, but I think we're asking about what's required to ensure viability in our businesses, kind of from the education standpoint too.
If I'll take a little bit of that plus what was the previous here. So hi, Coral, how are you? She was Mayor Flagstaff. We were on the League Executive Committee together. So yeah, I don't think she's wrong. I think Coral's right. I think that there has to be a focus there. You know, I mean, I give, you know, Michael Crow and NAU and U of A, I give them props for what they're trying to accomplish with the research and development and the you know, really trying to think outside the box. In fact, one of the things that made me a little angry just the other year was to hear the Speaker of the House. He's in education, and he talked about one of the things that made him mad. And he said, you know, we have legislators that are constantly going after the creative and ingenious ways by which these institutions are coming up to operate within the system, the parameters that they've been given, yet thinking outside the box. And then as soon as they become successful with it, we claim that that's not appropriate and they shouldn't be doing that. And so then we go back and work to curb that. Well, that's exactly the opposite of what we just told them to do, right? Which was to get creative and find a way around this. And so, you know, I think that to Fletcher's point about the longer term, yeah, we have to think outside the box, and we have to think about that technology. And what Trevor just said about, you know, going back and looking at things. I mean, my idea would be very simply to say, you know, I think this is an opportunity by which any governor, this governor or any other governor in the state, you know, should take this point and say, what is the best practices? You know, why aren't we putting together a leadership team of state and House and cities and towns and counties? And why isn't that committee going to the other states and finding out what incentives and what tax structures and what things work great for them? Now, I know their laws are a little different, but again, back to Trevor's point, you can bring that back and you can overlay that to our existing code, and you can say, this is what works and this was what doesn't. And so these are the things we would have to change. And can we get agreement on that? And can we find a way? But we can't continue to say the old way of doing it. I think we're seeing that now with, you know, things like APS and solar, right? It used to be that you put the line in the ground and someone had to hook up to it, and you billed the person for that, and you charged the tax on it, and you got your 30-year amortization schedule paid back because you had X amount of customers, right? That's really difficult today when you have, you know, now the solar, it's disruptive. It comes in and says, well, I don't need you necessarily APS, but yet I still do because I can't produce at night or I can't store energy. And now you have feeders back to it. That disruption creates a new problem, and government doesn't handle technology and forward thinking well. And so, you know, the thing that I look at is I look at the fact that Arizona used to be considered a very progressive state. And I don't mean that Republican or Democrat. I don't mean that taxation wise as regressive or progressive. I simply mean that we used to think outside the box. We used to look at what everyone else did and how could we do it better. And I don't know if we're doing that enough. I think that when I look down the list of, I was writing down some of the list of just tax incentives that cities have available to us. it's so limited. And at every turn, our state legislators are looking to curb those and take them away, which means that now, comparatively speaking, I have less and less, things that I can compete with against another city and another state. And I think back to the Winston Churchill quote. I used it this morning in a panel I was on, and it said, he famously said, "Give us the tools and we'll finish the job." And I just think, give us the tools. Let us go and find ways in which we can operate within our system, our beliefs here in Arizona. We'll make it uniquely ours. But more importantly, we can find ways to add things to the docket in ways in which we've never done before. And it will make it more fair, and it will make it more collaborative, and it'll make it more inventive, and it will certainly be more forward thinking. And that is what could set Arizona apart by miles.
Absolutely. And what I appreciate is the collaborative spirit that you're talking about and the innovative thinking, because that's definitely, we've got to do this together. We came up with that, Greater Phoenix, Greater Together. And I think, it has a lot to do with the spirit of what you're talking about. On another note, I would love to know what the city does to also roll out the welcome mat, and how do you welcome businesses, especially because we're focusing on state level taxes and incentives, but at the community level. When you're talking about speed to market or infrastructure or some of those other things. Can you just touch quickly, Mayor, on what you do with the city of Maricopa?
Sure. I mean, we're a smaller city. Obviously, we're 18 years old. We were 1,200 people 17 years ago. Now we're pushing 65,000 people. So literally, it's like picking up 50, 60,000 people, dropping them in the middle of farmland and saying, good luck, you need everything yesterday. And so that's the challenge that we deal with as a high growth city. We're going to do 2,500 housing permits this year, another 1,000 on top of that to multifamily. And so you figure that's about 10,000, 12,000 people added per year. I mean, it's just out of control, which is awesome. That's a great problem to have. But with that means that when you have rooftops, you have businesses, right? Because people and businesses want to create a symbiotic relationship. And that is critical to their survival on both sides of the equation. And so I think that, from our standpoint, one of the things that we've really tried to do is that while, we're incredibly small compared to the city of Phoenix or the city of Glendale or Mesa or Tucson, we're just a fraction of their population and even their city staff, but we have tried to do things that have set us apart and aside. And so I just talked about that creative thinking at the state level. We're trying to implement it at the local level. When folks come to talk to us, we assign them a VIP individual, by which that is the person that helps them go through our entire process, and they always have someone to speak with, and that person answers directly to the city manager. So if there's any problems, instead of them going off telling the developer community about how bad we are because something didn't work out, that person goes to the city manager picks up the phone and says, hey, this is what we can do, takes it to the city council, and we work it out. Again, all within code, all within state statute. But again, it's finding the ways to improve speed to market and making that business feel like, hey, these guys get things done. Because, we have recently stolen a few projects from Glendale and the city of Phoenix, which I never thought we'd ever say that, right? We're this small little city. Well, the fact of the matter is that we are being talked about now out there in the public domain as a city that gets things done. In fact, when we hired our city manager, we said, the primary purpose of us hiring you is find a way to say yes. That's what we want. We want to say yes. We're pro-growth, we're pro-business. We want to find a way to say yes. And at the same time, we know that by doing it, we're going to make the people happy, the businesses are going to succeed, and the tax rate's going to come down. And so you're literally spreading that wealth across a larger piece of the pie. And so ultimately you can take tax rates down. And so you're growing your way out of the problem. And that's what is possible and exciting in the state of Arizona. But we have to have that philosophy from a measured perspective while simultaneously finding efficiencies and effectiveness within government, which again, in our case, we've found millions of dollars recently in ways of not reducing services, but increasing services while just doing things more effectively and thinking more like a business.
Well done. Thank you, Mayor. I don't think anybody feels differently than you do about that. You've got a lot of fans on this call. So kind of wrapping it up, I appreciate this discussion so much. Fletcher, Trevor, Mayor Price, thank you for your insights. I will leave it to the audience if there's any last minute burning question. Otherwise, it's time to turn it back over to Stacey Tucker to give us some closing remarks. And thank you again for being with us today.
Cameron, could I just add one thing to the short term that I thought of, it just wasn't said, but it's going to be obvious, I think, to everyone, is broadband investments. Just and that goes to Trevor's point about the post-COVID economy, that you could hopefully there's a recognition that you could work from anywhere and have a well-paying job. So, if you could live in somewhere in rural Arizona, but be getting paid something akin to an LA salary, or maybe a higher big city salary, even a Phoenix salary compared to parts of rural Arizona, that would be big for a lot of communities to bring in people making more money to spend that money. And so I think that's that's just an issue that both sides of the aisle would agree on is key to future economic growth.
And we did see a boom with that during COVID. We did see a lot of California companies, Silicon Valley, renting houses in Sedona or Prescott or a lot of the rural parts to enjoy nature and still work. So I think that trend will still continue. So that's a great point, Fletcher.
Yeah. And I think too, the numbers are there. So it's, maybe 43% less to operate your business here in the state of Arizona versus the state of California, for example. But the livability, it's 90% less here, than it is to live in the Bay Area. It's just the housing is so out of control and things like that. So you're right. We've seen a lot of that happen in this kind of virtual setting, some shifting in the hub and spoke model and changing with the virtual officing and things like that. So I think that wraps it up. Thanks again for those final comments. And Stacy, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, again, I just want to thank everyone so much for their participation on the call. This has been fabulous. Our panelists, what great viewpoints from different directions. As we all know, Arizona is such a fast growing state. We're drawing people here from all over the country. We have a bright, bright future ahead. And with all the minds that are on the call, I love this idea of solution orientation, being nimble. How do we stay modern? It's going to be critical to our success in every element for sure across the state. And with that, I just say thank you so much to my coworkers at Flinn, to those at GPEC, again, to our panelists, Fletcher, Trevor, and Mayor Price. I wish you all well and good luck in your endeavors. And until the next CivEx, I think that's it for us here at Flinn. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Bye.